Hi, my name's Paul Galter. I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, April 14th, 1930. My parents were Clara Galter and Simon Galter. I have an older brother, Morris, who's now 82 years of age. He also was born in Lincoln. My parents came to this country in about 1920 from Russia. Actually, they came here from France because they lived in France for about 1 year before they actually came to the United States. My father lived in Kiev. My mother lived in a little town in Russia called Ovrich, and my grandfather, my mother's father, he called himself a chemist. I guess we would call them pharmacists today. My father was in the military and was stationed in Ovrich, and during the late 19, just before 1920, my mother's family decided to leave Russia, and my father came with them. They went to France, but my mother's brother had tuberculosis, and because of his physical condition, he could not come to the United States. So my grandfather wouldn't leave him behind, and so they lived in France for about a year until he died, unfortunately, and then they came to the United States. Actually, my father did not have a visa, and he came into this country as my mother's brother. That's something I didn't really know till after my father died because the family kind of kept that a secret for some reason. Um, the family settled in Omaha, Nebraska, and the reason for it was that sometime around 1988 or 89, my uncle Morris Fox, he'd be my great uncle, it'd be my mother's uncle, came to the United States, settled in Omaha, went to Creighton, graduated from Creighton, and became a pharmacist in the United States and had a small drugstore at 15th and Harney in Omaha. He associated with uh, my grandfather's nephew, whose name was Freger. His name was Fox. While they were at the drugstore, they developed a cough drop, and they didn't call it Freger and Fox. They called it F&F. And originally, the F&F was manufactured in Omaha, and then I can still remember in my earliest childhood, which would be about 1935, they moved their factory to Council Bluffs, and they had the F&F cough drop factory in Council Bluffs. Eventually, they moved it to Chicago, and the F&F cough drop factory, I think, which has since acquired Smith Brothers, is still in Chicago. Although my uncle died many years ago. My uncle Morris Fox had 7 sisters, and he methodically brought them all to the United States. All of them originally settled in Omaha. The oldest was my grandmother, who was a Fox and married Yeshua Freger, who was my grandfather. And they settled in Omaha. They all came over together, I think around 1919 or 1920. I'm not really sure of the year. At that time, they kind of put my grandfather up in a grocery store at 2556 Douglas Street, and he operated that grocery store till the time that he died, which was about 1956. And all of the sisters, one of them married a Sugart, and they had the meat market in Omaha. For those of you in Omaha who remember the Sugart market for many years, one of the sisters married Louis Rich from Rock Island, Illinois, and he became famous for Louis Rich meats. And there's quite a family that still lives in the Quad City area in Illinois. Uh, my father originally did some factory work when he came to the United States. He didn't marry my mother right away, but they did marry, I believe, in 1924. It was always kind of a secret. One of the things they didn't want to do was ever celebrate wedding anniversaries or birthdays. I think one of the reasons my father didn't want to celebrate his birthday is he came in as somebody else, and I never really did know how old he was. I think when he died, which was February 15th, 1985, I think he was 88 years old, but claimed to be 86. In any event, he they lived in Omaha for a while. He then went to work for a department store dealing with fabrics and ladies ready to wear. Eventually, in about 1925, my parents moved to Lincoln. My father had an opportunity to take over as a manager in the same area where he was working, in a small department store in Lincoln at 9th and O called the Golden Eagle. It no longer exists there. And he worked there for about 6 or 7 years, and then in the very early 1930s, he rented a store next door to the Golden Eagle, which was at 913 O Street, and opened up a ladies ready-to-wear store, and he operated that store until about 1954. Somewhere along the line, someone else had opened up a beauty shop in the back of the store, and they moved out sometime in the 1940s, so my mother opened up a beauty shop. She's not a beautician, but they continued to operate the beauty shop until they actually went out of business in about 1954. 1954 was the same year. Well, in 1953 I graduated from law school. In 1954 I went into the military service for 2 years. After I'd gone into the military service, I discovered that my father had enrolled in law school on a part-time basis. And I think he just went to law. When I was in law school and I'd bring my books home, and I don't think I spent much time reading them, but my dad went through them rather carefully and became quite interested, which is how he decided to go to law school. And he eventually graduated from law school in 1960. And oddly enough, I think I was the first person in Nebraska. When you're admitted to the bar, someone moves for your admission, and I think I was the first son to offer the admission of the father. There'd been many of the reverse, but I think I was the first one to do that. My dad did practice law until he died in 1985. My mother continued to live in Lincoln until she died in 1997, in March 1997. She was very active in Hadassah, sold a number of lifetime memberships. I think everybody in Lincoln eventually bought one to get away from her, because she hounded everybody until they actually bought their lifetime membership. I think I had previously mentioned that my great uncle Morris Fox methodically brought all of his sisters, I think one at a time, to the United States from Russia, and they eventually all settled in Omaha. The only relatives in Omaha that I still know are alive, there's Nate Sugart. I saw Nate about a year ago when my mother had a sister, Neoma Klotz. She married Abe Klotz. They're all deceased, and Neoma's daughter, who would be my first cousin, Theone, died about 2 years ago in Omaha. The only people at the funeral were Nate Sugart, Doris Sugart, and I, and someone rounded up a minion to come out for the service, but the family is pretty well scattered. The people who are still left live in the Quad City area. I have two, it would be my mother's first cousins, but they are close to my age. There's Marty Rich and Norman Rich, who were the sons of Louis Rich. They are still alive. They had an older sister who died about 20 years ago. Um, Actually, the Louis Rich family got lucky during World War II. They were in the egg business, and they had an egg candling factory. Egg candling, I think, means that they produce dried eggs, as far as I know. But in any event, they got a contract with the government in World War II, a rather large contract, to produce um, the dried eggs for the troops overseas. And it became a very large operation. Eventually, they started opening up turkey farms, and probably about 25 years ago, they sold the entire operation for a significant amount. Morris Fox was really the patriarch of the family. He is one of those, while he was alive, who attended every funeral, went to every event, went to every wedding, went to every bar mitzvah while he was able to. He lived to be over 100. I went to his 102nd birthday party in Chicago, where many of our relatives were, and I believe that was in 1986. It was the year after my father died. And he lived for a year or two after that. It was really pretty sound up until that time. He stayed pretty strong mentally, given his age. The other members of the family have kind of, my brothers kept track of a lot of the people in the Iowa area, in the Davenport, Iowa area. They are all kind of connected with the Louis Rich family. The others are pretty well scattered to the winds. I had Sam Freger, Morris Freger, who was the Freger of Freger and Fox, and my grandfather's nephew, although they were about the same age, had a son and a daughter. They are now both deceased. He had a grandson who now lives in Florida, who actually produced a book of our whole, and it goes back into the about 1850s, of the history of both the Fox and the Freger families. And he produced that book while my mother was still alive. Fortunately, he was able to interview the family, the older members of the family, in the 90s, and the book was produced in about 1996 or 1997. And it had where every relative was, who everyone married, what their children's names were. But in Omaha, the only ones that I am personally aware of are the members of the Schuckert family. Okay, from my earliest days, both of my parents worked at what was Galter's Grand Leader, a ladies' ready-to-wear store at 913 O Street in Lincoln, Nebraska. My dad, I think, had the ability to speak about 7 different languages or dialects: Bohemian, German, Yiddish, Russian, some French. There was a very large Russian-German population in Lincoln, where the people spoke either little or no English, or very poor English, and his business developed really with the German-Russian population. They were non-Jewish, but the German-Russian population in Lincoln, and a number of other newcomers to the country, simply because my father could speak with them. I can still remember that on the store, it was the home of the $1.98 dress, which tells us a little bit about the times. In the store, my mother was there every day. After school, actually after school I went to Hebrew school, but after Hebrew school I would then, it wasn't very far from the store, and I would either get a ride or go to the store. and I spent a large amount of my time in the store doing various things or doing nothing. But they continued to operate that store for, it was about 30 some years until they went out of business. My father became very friendly with the landlord, and the landlord, who liked my father and had no children, at a later time in his life decided to sell the building to my father for practically nothing, simply because of that. My father was in the military, and he was a very astute student of history and geography. And during World War II, he kept a very large map on the wall in the store that would show what was happening in the military. He had pins and diagrams and various things to show where the military was and what was going on. And he became very popular locally before service clubs and others as a speaker to describe what was happening in the war and the geography. He really knew the geography of Europe, and he knew where, we wouldn't know that they were running into mountainous territory, but he knew, and he knew why the war would go this way or that way, and he probably made 100 speeches in the 40s to various service clubs around the city. He was a mathematical genius, I don't know how else to put it. He could compute anything or figure out anything just instantly in his head. And but actually was a very popular speaker. My mother became very active in Hadassah, and that became something that was one of the favorite things for her to do. Fortunately, they both were in reasonably good health during their life. My father developed diabetes, type 2 diabetes, in his late 60s, and it eventually was his undoing. He actually had a leg amputated in about 1982, about 3 years before his death, but got a prosthetic leg and got around just fine. Unfortunately, eventually he got pneumonia, and his diabetes became brittle, or there's a word for it, brittle maybe, and he succumbed. My mother might have lived a lot longer, except that her doctor decided it was no longer, when she got to be about 85, it was no longer necessary to give her pap smears. And she unfortunately discovered that she had cancer at about 90, and that caused her to die a couple years later. She had surgery even at age 90, but they weren't able to save her. An interesting feature of my mother was when she was 70 years old and was hospitalized for minor surgery, my father told the hospital people that she was 68, and the reason for it was that at that time, if you were 70 or older, they put sides up on the beds, and she didn't like it. So he told them that she was 68. She then adopted that age, and from then on, she was 2 years younger than she was. When everybody thought she was 90, she was really 92. She died at age 92, and she was really 94. Because of that, she gave me instructions not to put the date of birth on her headstone when she died, because she had claimed to be 2 years younger than she actually was. And her tombstone does not have the date of birth on it. I kind of knew it at the time, because I was aware of the fact that she was claimed to be a little younger. I can remember on one occasion when she and I were in Rochester, where she was having surgery on her leg, and at that time she was in her 80s, and I implored her to tell her actual age rather than the 2 years younger that she was claiming to be, and she insisted that we give the younger age because if she's younger they'd try harder to save her. than if she was older. That was her theory, I guess. But that was one of the things she went to her grave with, claiming to be 2 years younger than she was. And I used to talk to her about, most people are happy to get to be 90. What difference does it make whether you're 90 or 92 or 94? But she was very firm about that. It was always very careful about her appearance. She always looked like she just stepped out of a beauty shop, no matter where she went, until the day she died.
Paul, tell me about your brother.
Okay. My brother, Morris, he's 4 years younger than I. He's still working. He's an active broker. Maury was a very good athlete and played American Legion baseball. He played on Lincoln High's football team in 1941, 42, and 43. In 1943, Lincoln High played Massillon, Ohio for a kind of a mythical national championship, high school championship. Massillon, Ohio at that time was coached by a guy by the name of Brown, who went on to coach the Cleveland professional team. And Lincoln High had a team that could play with anybody, except Brown at that time was the first person to develop what is called the platoon system. And Lincoln High was ahead 7-0 at the end of the first quarter, and then they played a different team the second quarter, and it was 7-7 at the half, and the game ended 40-7 in favor of Massillon, Ohio, because they simply got worn down. But he was a very good athlete. He was a good hitter. He had professional offers to play baseball that he wanted to accept. My father wouldn't let him accept them because he was ready to go into the military service. He was born in 1926, and he graduated from high school in 43, and he was in what is called a V-12 program. And the V-12 program was one where they would go to school, and he actually went to school being in the Navy in Massillon, Ohio, in Marysville, Missouri. And because he was going into the service, my dad wouldn't let him sign a professional contract, or wouldn't sign it for him, on the theory that if he still wanted to do that when he got out of the service, then he could make the decision at that time. But he wasn't going to commit him when his future was uncertain. While my brother was in Maryville, Missouri, he took a number of tests to be admitted to Annapolis, and he got an appointment to Annapolis by Senator Butler, then a senator in Lincoln. Was at Annapolis, I believe, for 2 years. While he was there, he played on Annapolis's baseball team. Became a boxer at Annapolis. I think won a division in boxing. When he got out of when the war was over, he decided that he didn't want the military to be his career, and so he left Annapolis, came back to the University of Nebraska, completed his education, became a mechanical engineer. He then went to work for John Deere in Iowa, Waterloo, Iowa, and worked for John Deere for quite a few years. While he was at John Deere, he and another person kind of developed some type of hose. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but they then opened up a manufacturing plant somewhere else in Iowa where they were manufacturing certain hoses that were for vehicles, motor vehicles. They opened up another place in Dallas. They then sold the whole thing to Dayton Rubber Company, and he became a stockbroker. And he has been a stockbroker ever since. He kind of abandoned his athletic career in favor of that. He still works every day in Dallas. I could call him, well, probably not today, but he goes to work every day in the morning and really works all day. While he was at Maryville, Missouri, they had a very good football team that included eventually A fellow by the name of Jim Swanson. I don't know if any of you know of Hovland Swanson in Lincoln. He was a Swanson from the Hovland Swanson family, which was a very good women's clothing store in Lincoln. A guy by the name of Rocky Miller, who eventually played for the University of Nebraska. And they were an undefeated team, and they were winning games by huge margins, like 56-0, 62-0. And they had national prominence at the time, and more recently, my brother, I should say more recently, it's probably been 4 or 5 years ago, I think they had a 60th reunion of that team in Maryville, Missouri that he went to. He came to Lincoln after that. My brother does an extensive amount of traveling, and I've done some traveling with him. As a matter of fact, we were planning to go to Hong Kong tomorrow together. But his wife's mother became ill, and we postponed that trip. A year ago, we all went to Spain, France. We have a cousin, Boris, who lives in Bordeaux, and we spent several days with him. The year before that, we went to Portugal together, and we've taken a number of trips together, so I still have quite a bit of contact with him. He's very active. I mean, he's 4 years older than I am, but I have really a hard time keeping up with him because he likes to walk everywhere we go.
Let's talk a little bit about growing up. What was a dinner like at home? Were you guys all together, or were your parents in the store?
No, when we were younger, they were in the store, but they were home every night. We always lived for many years, and we had a very modest background. We lived in a rented home at 18th and Sumner in Lincoln for a few years, and then we moved. I'm not sure why I remember these addresses. We moved to 2709 Everett, which was a small rented home. We moved again to 1221 Lake, which was a small rented home. We lived at 2050 South 15th Street, which was a small rented home. I think it wasn't until 1944 that my parents bought their first home at 3178 Puritan Drive. Lived there till 1960. But the family remained very close. We did a lot of things together. I remember at home, every night, of course these were before the days of TV, we would play cards, we'd play bridge. My dad and I would play chess every night. They spent a lot of time with me. By the time I was 3, I knew that 18 times 18 was 324 and 19 times 19 was 361. By the time I was 4, I could read. I remember when I went to Prescott grade school, they started me a little early. My mother wanted me to start in September, but I was only 4 years and 5 months, and I was a little too early to start, so she had me take a test. And as a result of the testing, they let me go to school. There is a school in Lincoln now called May Morley. Well, May Morley was the principal at Prescott Grade School where I went. And she discovered early on that I had some special mathematical powers. You could give me 10 small digit numbers like 12, 9, 18, 6, and as soon as you were done, I could tell you what they added up to, and I could repeat them for you backwards or forwards. In the early days when I was at Prescott in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, after that apparently it wasn't that unusual. Whenever there were visitors at the school, she would call me into the principal's office and to perform. Actually, I hated it because I had this fear of failure. I had this fear that here she's holding me up to do these unusual memory and mathematical things, and I'd fail and then be very embarrassed. Fortunately, that never occurred, but at a certain point she sensed that I was uncomfortable and stopped doing it. But I stayed very friendly with May Morley until she died. But we had kind of a normal background at home. My parents were home every night. We were a family that never consumed alcohol. As a result, I haven't had 10 drinks of alcohol in my entire life. I guess maybe, I'm not sure why, but my parents never drank. We didn't have alcohol in the home. My brother really never consumed alcohol to any extent. We spent a lot of time following my brother's athletic career because he was a very good athlete in high school especially, and he played at the University of Nebraska for 1 year before he went into the military.
How about religious holidays? How did you celebrate those?
We celebrated the religious holidays like everybody else. We were members of the synagogue. The synagogue at that time was at 18th and L Street in Lincoln. We were members. My brother and I went to Hebrew school every night, Monday through Thursday after school, during the school year. In the summer we got a reprieve until bar mitzvahs. Then we stayed in Sunday school until confirmation, but we attended all of the holidays, all of the functions, participated in everything, at least at that time. And my parents, my mother especially, stayed very active. We did not we tried to observe the dietary laws. My mother came from a family that observed the dietary laws. After she moved to Lincoln, it was a little awkward going to Omaha to buy kosher meat, which they did, but we finally gave it up and stopped observing the dietary laws. But my father was a religious scholar, and he actually every night of his life he would sit reading, and frequently was reading the Talmud or other things in Hebrew. He was really an extremely bright guy. But his actually, and he turned out to really be a good lawyer, even though he started at age 60, about 60. I'm not exactly sure how old, and I never knew when his birthday was. To this day, I don't have any idea when his birthday was. But an interesting feature was my father had a rather large family, and he knew that he had a brother that came across about when he did, and a sister that came to the United States about when he did. The rest of the family stayed in Russia, although eventually they've all either died or they've gone. It wasn't until 1946 that we discovered his sister in New York, who then led us to his brother in Montreal. And we then became very close with their families. I guess it was rather shocking the first time I went to Montreal and saw his brother. They looked alike. And, it was kind of a shock to see somebody that looked just like my father. And they had opened up printing. They were lithographers, a printing company, and were very successful in Montreal. The family is still there. They've since moved to Toronto for personal reasons, but not too long ago, just a couple years ago, one of the last youngest surviving brother who had gone from Russia to Israel was visiting his daughter in Canada, and my brother and I went to Toronto and spent some time with them, and that would have been about 3 years ago. I think he has since died, but he came over at that time. So the older generation, unfortunately, is gone by now.
How about on your mother's side? Siblings?
She had unfortunately, she had one brother who died at an early age, and he died in France, never got to the United States. He was the youngest. And I think my brother was named after him. Her sister Neoma was about 4 years younger, and just lived in Omaha until she died. She died of a stroke, and she was married, I think I'd mentioned earlier, to Abe Klotz, who was from Omaha. He's now deceased, and they had one daughter, but other than that, and their family was very close. After my parents moved from Omaha to Lincoln, even after I was born, and this was like 4 years later, although my earliest recollections would have been 3 or 4 years after that, we went to Omaha every Sunday. Every Sunday we drove to Omaha and spent time with my grandparents every Sunday. And during the summers, I would usually go and spend at least part of the summer with them, with my grandparents. And got to know that area of Omaha around 25th and Douglas Street very well. It's all gone now. I think there's a car lot there now. I'm not sure what's there. But there was a huge old apartment building with a grocery store built right into it. And at the back of the grocery store was the living quarters where my grandparents went. And that's a place where a lot of the family congregated. It was very small, but that's where we would have Seder services, always at my grandparents'. All the relatives would be there, at least our family would be there until my grandfather died.
Paul, tell me about your high school years here in Lincoln.
Well, my high school years were uneventful. I went to Lincoln High School for 3 years. The only thing that I can think of is that I became active in debate. I and another fellow by the name of Keith Fitch won the interclass debate, won the Missouri Valley debate tournament, won some other tournaments around. But beyond that, I always wanted to be an athlete like my brother, but I didn't have the same talent or skills or size. So I guess I became the debater and he became the athlete. But other than that, I went to Lincoln High for 3 years. After I graduated from Lincoln High, I had just turned 17. I became Sammy at the University of Nebraska, Sigma Alpha Mu. I didn't live at the Sammy house because I was from Lincoln. There were several other Lincolnites. I don't know, Forrest Moser. There was the Moser family. Forey, I think, now lives somewhere in the San Francisco area, comes back periodically. His little brother Leonard is still in Lincoln, and I think is still in business. There was a big article in the newspaper about Leonard just a few days ago in his unfinished furniture store. I went to the University of Nebraska I took 2 years of pre-law, and they had a law program at that time where with 2 years of pre-law, you would go to law school for 4 years. The other option was to take 4 years, get your degree, and then go to law school for 3 years. So I was in the 2 and 4 year program, so I was able to finish school in 6 years, and I got out in 1953. At that time, I had gone through the advanced ROTC program and came out in the Air Force, came out as a lieutenant, entered the military service May 1 of '04, and I was stationed at Randolph Air Force Base for 2 years, from 1954 to 1956. While in the military, I was a lawyer, and I was assigned to the Staff Judge Advocate's office there. For the first year, I did trial work, and had many trials, and it was really a good experience for me. All of my mistakes were at the expense of poor young soldiers or airmen. While I was there, I had kind of a major trial involving a guy who had written bad checks, and I had written for him a clemency petition to try to keep him out of jail. And at Randolph Air Force Base, there was also the headquarters of Crew Training Air Force. And the Staff Judge Advocate of Crew Training Air Force, in other words, there were about 8 bases in crew training Air Force, Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Randolph, and a number of others, liked the clemency petition and transferred me to his office. So the next year, instead of doing trial work, I really regretted this, I reviewed trials for legal sufficiency. I did a totally different thing. And but I enjoyed working with Arnold LaBelle, who was the staff judge advocate. He was a Jewish lawyer from New York. He liked to pick up lawyers because all of the permanent people in the military, according to him, were lazy and didn't do very good work. I don't know that that was true, but it was really a good year with him, although I missed the trial work because I was just really trying to learn how to get trial experience. What I would do in the military is, if there was a case that was tried, I would review it for legal sufficiency and write an opinion as to whether we thought that it was legally sufficient. I had one kind of famous case. There was an Airman Dutcher who had been convicted of theft. And at that time in the military, you could go to a rehabilitation center. They had one in Amarillo, Texas. And you could go through rehabilitation and then be restored to the military and even come back with one stripe. And Airman Dutcher, who had been a thief, came back to Randolph with one stripe. And one day someone had claimed that he'd lost $42. Someone had stolen $42 from him. A 20, 2 10s, and 2 1s. And the commander of the unit immediately suspected Dutcher, went to his home in Randolph, in San Antonio, and ordered him out on the porch, searched him, and in a portion of his billfold found the 20, 2 10s, and 2 1s, at which time Dutcher confessed. He went through court-martial and was given 20 years for stealing $42. I felt that the search was illegal, and at that time, a commander always had the right to search a member of his command. It was one of the exceptions to the amendment dealing with search and seizure, illegal searches and seizures. But I didn't think that a commander had the right to search a member of his command off of a military base. And so I decided that the conviction was not valid because the search led to the confession, and of course if the search is illegal, then the fruits of the search cannot be used. I still do something about criminal law at that time. Colonel LaBelle disagreed with me. I also recommended that his sentence be reduced to 2 years. 20 was outrageous for that sort of crime. Colonel LaBelle agreed with the 2 years, but wrote an opinion sustaining the conviction. It went all the way to the Court of Military Appeals, which is like the United States Supreme Court, but in the military. They eventually agreed with Colonel LaBelle. I have kind of a letter of commendation saying that they thought that our two positions focused on what the real issue was. And my view was that at that time, the military law was approximating civilian law. We were becoming, at that time, an army of civilians, not an army of soldiers, and that we ought to follow, and it was moving in that direction. Oddly enough, 4 years later, in a case called Mapp versus Ohio, the Supreme Court determined that sort of search that the Court of Military Appeals held to be lawful was unlawful. And the laws and the military commander no longer has the right to search a member of his command off of a military base. He still can on a military base. So in a sense, I was right, but too early. I really enjoyed the military. The person I worked for, when I was in the military, I started playing duplicate bridge. It became very involved in playing duplicate bridge. They had some great bridge players in San Antonio, Texas, and I would go to the Gunter Hotel in the evening and play duplicate bridge. And I had, before I was transferred to Colonel LaBelle's unit, I had received permission from my boss, so to speak, who was a Colonel Arnold Lumpkin, to take off Wednesday and Thursday to go to a bridge tournament in Fort Worth. He was giving me permission to go. I did some extra work to justify it. And suddenly on Monday of that week, I'm transferred to another unit, and I didn't know whether to ask Colonel LaBelle for the time off or not. But finally got up enough nerve to go in and explain to him that I didn't have to go to the tournament. I would like to. I had the time off before I got transferred. And that's when I discovered what kind of a guy he was, when he said I could certainly go, but he noticed that I had kind of an old car, and he was worried about me driving and suggested that I take his car. I assured him that my car was okay, but he was just a great person to work for. And the office was run as a law office, not as a part of the military. He encouraged me to remain in the military. I even gave it some thought at the time, because it was such an easy life. It was an 8 to 5. You know, when you went home at 5 o'clock, the day was over. And if you never showed up again, it didn't make a difference. But I didn't really want to, and I really liked San Antonio, Texas, which is where I was. You know, having been raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, the variety in San Antonio was much more interesting. But I decided to come back to Nebraska. And I had started working for a lawyer by the name of J.J. Marks. I went back and worked with him for about 4 years after I left, and then I associated with another lawyer, Hal Bauer, until he died a few years ago. I'm still associated with some other lawyers, but I come to work every day at 7 days a week. Some days I work the whole day, some days I do something else in the afternoons, but at least I start out here every day. And I enjoy coming down. 2 children, a son, Tracy, who's now going to be 49 years of age. He lives in Lincoln. Right now he's living with me, but he's just bought a home that he's renovating and is going to move into. He's worked for the city of Lincoln for many years, and looks like he'll probably retire there. I have a younger daughter, Dana, who is going to be 39 in May. Dana went through school in Lincoln, finished up at Omaha, graduated from Omaha U, then decided to go to law school at Creighton, where she met her present husband. He was from Peoria, Illinois. His father was a lawyer. Dana then moved to Peoria. She got married in 1997, and will be married 11 years. She has 4 children, Tommy, Billy, Ben, and Jimmy. The kids are all doing well. She has 4 boys. Jimmy is a very good athlete. He's a natural. And as a matter of fact, I used to go to Peoria quite a bit last year to watch him play baseball. He was on a team that was undefeated. And they went to a tournament in Davenport. They were invited to a tournament in Davenport where there were about 26 teams. And it ended up being kind of a knockout. And they ended up playing the Davenport team, which was a team that hadn't lost a game in 3 years. And they won, and he was really a good athlete. And I see the kids quite a bit. They correspond with me quite a bit. My daughter Dana had the mathematical ability also, where I could, and I'm going to mention this because of Jimmy. When Dana was 4 or 5, she wanted to play this game. I could take a number like 78523, which adds up to 25. And I would say, Dana, I have a 5-digit number that adds up to 25. The second number is the largest. The 5th number is the smallest. And the second number is 1 larger than the first. The first is 2 larger than the third. The 4th and 5th add up to the third. And the 3rd and 4th add up to the second. There are no repeating numbers. She might ask me for a clue, but she would very soon come up with 78532. And we would do that constantly. She drove me crazy. Now Jimmy's doing the same thing. He has the advantage where I will email him like 10 problems, and then he'll do them. But he can see the numbers. Dana used to have to remember them. She'd have to remember the clues, like the second is 1 bigger than the first, and the second is 4 times the 5th. So she had that same mathematical ability, and I think Jimmy has it too. And if the boys are watching, I want them to know that their grandfather loves them. Was the Freger of Freger and Fox, and my grandfather's nephew, although they were about the same age, had a son and a daughter. They are now both deceased. He had a grandson who now lives in Florida, who actually produced a book of our whole, and it goes back into the about 1850s, of the history of both the Fox and the Freger families. And he produced that book while my mother was still alive. But fortunately, he was able to interview the family, the older members of the family, in the 90s, and the book was produced in about 1996 or 1997. And it had where every relative was, who everyone married, what their children's names were. But in Omaha, the only ones that I am personally aware of are the members of the Schuckert family. Fox was really the patriarch of the family. He is one of those, while he was alive, who attended every funeral, went to every event, went to every wedding, went to every bar mitzvah, while he was able to. He lived to be over 100. I went to his 102nd birthday party in Chicago, where many of our relatives were, and I believe that was in 1986. It was the year after my father died. And he lived for a year or two after that. It was really pretty sound until that time. He stayed pretty strong mentally, given his age. Fox, he'd be my great uncle, he'd be my mother's uncle, came to the United States, settled in Omaha, went to Creighton, graduated from Creighton, and became a pharmacist in the United States, and had a small drugstore at 15th and Harney in Omaha. He associated with my grandfather's nephew, whose name was Freger. His name was Fox. While they were at the drugstore, they developed a cough drop. And they didn't call it Freger and Fox, they called it F&F. And originally, the F&F was manufactured in Omaha. And then I can still remember in my earliest childhood, which would be about 1935, they moved their factory to Council Bluffs, and they had the F&F cough drop factory in Council Bluffs. Eventually, they moved it to Chicago, and the F&F cough drop factory, I think, which has since acquired Smith Brothers, is still in Chicago. Although my uncle died many years ago. My uncle Morris Fox had 7 sisters, and he methodically brought them all to the United States. All of them originally settled in Omaha. The oldest was my grandmother, who was a Fox and married Yeshua Freger, who was my grandfather. And they settled in Omaha. They all came over together, I think around 1919 or 1920. I'm not really sure of the year. At that time, they kind of put my grandfather up in a grocery store at 2556 Douglas Street, and he operated that grocery store till the time that he died, which was about 1956. And all of the sisters, one of them married a Sugart, and they had the meat market in Omaha, for those of you in Omaha who remember the Sugart market for many years. One of the sisters married Louis Rich from Rock Island, Illinois, and he became famous for Louis Rich meats. And there's